Good evening, everybody. It's Julie again. As you may have seen, if you watched my video yesterday, I went to see Sound of Freedom in the theaters. And what a touching, amazing movie that is. And it really is just the tip of the iceberg story on human trafficking. That's just a little drop in the bucket of what really goes on. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some very serious things. So this video is not for children. We're going to be talking about some very hard subject matter. So parental discretion is advised, but people need to hear this. So I hope that you're here with me to learn a little bit about human trafficking. There'll be many more videos that I'll be doing on this, and I'll also, be doing my child advocacy videos about child abuse and everything else that that I am involved in as being a guardian ad litem in the state of Florida. It's a volunteer position where I go visit children in foster care. But my main point on this video is to touch on human trafficking, because the movie made me want to take a stand. It made me want to make a difference. It made me want to just do something. So I figure something for me to do is to explain to people and educate people on what human trafficking is. And I hope that you'll be watching some of the other videos that'll be coming up about child advocacy, child abuse and neglect, and everything that I'm going to hopefully be putting out there for y'all. So without further ado, just remember parental discretion advice, because we're going to be talking about a very tough subject here. So a lot of this stuff that I'm sharing with you as a guardian ad litem, I've been through training. This is, the training that I've had over the years. This first section is going to be a little bit of the older stuff that I had. I do have a presentation sheet that I had when I was taking class, so it's a little bit older information. The next video will have even more up-to-date information. So let's get started. Slavery was abolished 150 years ago, and yet there are more people in slavery today than at any other time in our history. Now, during this video, you're going to be hearing CSEC, and that is CSEC. And what that is the commercial and sexual exploitation of children. So CSEC is sexual activity involving a child in exchange for something of value or a promise thereof to the child or another person or persons. The child is treated as a commercial and sexual object. CSEC is a form of violence against children. CSEC includes street prostitution, pornography, stripping, erotic and nude massage, escort services, phone sex lines, private parties, gang-based prostitution, interfamilial pimping, and forms of internet-based exploitation. And I will tell you, I was in our human trafficking summit in January, and the internet is just a major source of how children are getting trafficked. If you let your children online, please monitor their accounts. Do not let them be online without your presence, because people are getting to children and they're befriending them and making them think that they're their only friend. And guys, it's real. It's out there. This is how they get to our children. Child sexual abuse. Any sexual activity with a child where consent is not or cannot be given. The sexually abusive acts may include penetration, creation of pornographic images, sexual touching, or non-contact acts such as exposure or voyeurism. Sexual exploitation of children is taking unfair advantage of the imbalance of power between an adult and a youth or child under the age of 18 for the purpose of sexual pleasure. It can also involve remuneration in money, goods, or services, or the promise of money, goods, or services to the child. Domestic minor sex trafficking. Domestic minor sex trafficking consists of all forms of CSEC. It occurs when a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident of the U.S. who has not attained 18 years of age is engaged in a commercial sex act. Just a couple facts about sex trafficking. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 defines sex trafficking as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for a commercial sex act, or in which the person induced to perform such an act is under 18 years of age. When a minor is trafficked for a commercial sex act, there is no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And some myths about sex trafficking. A myth is trafficking is defined by the crossing of state or national borders. Only foreign nationals can be victims of trafficking. There are plenty of human trafficking victims right here in the U.S., so it's everywhere. CSEC in the United States. At least 100,000 to 300,000 youth are at risk for commercial sexual exploitation annually in the U.S. The average age of entry into the commercial sex industry in the U.S. is 12 years old. And as a child advocate, I will tell you, our children in the foster care system are at the most risk because they're looking for that family feeling, and these people that are trafficking them lure them in by making them feel like a part of a family, making them feel like they understand them. So, if you know children that are in foster care, please help keep an eye on them. The National Incident Studies of Missing, Abducted, Runaway, and Throwaway Children estimate that 1.6 million children run away from home each year in the U.S. 1 in 3 teens will be recruited by a pimp within 48 hours of leaving home and becoming homeless. That is huge, folks. That is just huge. And we have to keep our children safe. We have to. Studies of adult women in the sex industry report that 62% of respondents had been raped in prostitution. 73% had experienced physical assault in prostitution. 72 were currently or formerly homeless. 92% stated that they wanted to escape prostitution immediately. And 78% of 55 women who sought help, there was a bunch of that sought help from the council. One thing we got to do is we got to address the demand. They're situational abusers. They're adults who use children for sex, not because they have a predisposition to do so, but because they want to find themselves in a situation where it is possible. Such men engage in the criminal activity of sex with minors under 18 without necessarily feeling any real sexual attraction towards them. For some people it's control. For some people it's wanting to get away with something. So there are just so many different aspects. These people can be just normal family men with regular partners and in every way normal lives. For this reason, they are particularly difficult to identify and often are protected by those around them who find it impossible to accept that Mr. Normal next door or their husband, brother, son could possibly have sex with children. And folks, here in the U.S., a big part of trafficking is families. People are trafficking their own children, and it's horrible. It's just horrible. The stories that I've heard, oh my God, it's crazy. Factors influencing demand. Presence of adult sex industry. Without equivocation, the presence of pre-existing adult prostitution markets contributes measurably to the creation of secondary sexual markets in which children are sexually exploited. we find no support for the legalization of prostitution in the U.S., especially given the relationship that we can confirm to exist between adult and juvenile sexual exploitation. Dehumanization of prostituted women. They are objects in my mind. They never had families or anything. And this is what somebody's saying. And that was John Ricken in a statement to the police admitting to the murders of 17 prostituted women, many of whose names he could not remember. In 1994, he said, I picked prostitutes as my victims because I hate most prostitutes and I did not want to pay them for sex. I also picked prostitutes as victims because they were easy to pick up. Without being noticed, I knew they would not be reported missing away and might never be reported missing. I picked prostitutes because I thought I could kill as many of them as I wanted without getting caught. He thought these people had nobody that cared about them. But I'm sure that they all did. Dehumanization of C-sex victims. Of Gary Ridgway's 48 admitted victims, 27 of these victims were between the ages of 15 and 18 years old. The Green River Killer was therefore one of the largest child serial killers in the U.S. ever, and the largest known killer of C-sex victims, yet the fact that many of his victims were children and youth is never mentioned because they were viewed as prostitutes. Internet pornography. There are over 100,000 sites offering illegal child pornography and hundreds and thousands more offering legal, teen, or barely legal pornography. In 2006, there were over 20 million searches using the words teen porn or teen sex. And this starts out easy for our children. They're typing online and someone befriends them and they ask them to send pictures. So they send a picture innocently enough, and then the person's wanting to send more, and they may not want to do this, and then they're guilted. Oh, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your family. If you don't do this, I'm going to do that. If you don't do this, I'm going to do that. Or they'll pay them. If your kids are bringing home Amazon cards and different things, this is a big tip that something is going on. If they've got something coming in that you have no idea where it's coming from, big red flag, folks. Big red flag. Now, another form of trafficking is labor trafficking. And what labor trafficking is, it's the recruitment of harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person's for labor services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. Now I can tell you this, these people are promised to be set free. They just have to work off their debt. But then there's another reason for them to have to stay, and another reason, and another reason, and they're just stuck. They can't get out from under them. There's been many stories out about it, folks, many stories. And the children that are coming in, our open border, folks, is so dangerous. You just don't know. Let me tell you a little scenario here. These kids are being sent over. They're already bought by traffickers. And what they do is they send these children over the border, and they have a little tag on them, and it has a phone number on them, and that's their family in the U.S. We don't vet them. We just call the number, and we send them to whoever that is. People, a lot of them are traffickers. They're not their family. They've been sent over here, they've been bought, they've been paid for, and then they're forced into prostitution, labor trafficking, just all of it. And that's how it works, folks. And we're just letting them pour over the border and not protecting these children. We have got to do something. We've just got to. There's different types of labor trafficking. There's bonded labor or debt bondage is probably the least known form of labor trafficking today. and yet it is the most widely used method of enslaving people. Victims become bonded laborers when their labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or service in which its terms and conditions have not been defined, or in which the value of the victim's services, as reasonably assessed, is not applied toward the liquidation of the debt. The value of their work is greater than the original sum of money borrowed. It's this vicious cycle, folks. Vicious, vicious cycle. Forced labor is a situation in which victims are forced to work against their own will under the threat of violence or some other form of punishment. Their freedom is restricted and a degree of ownership is exerted. Forms of forced labor can include domestic servitude, agricultural labor, sweatshop factory labor, janitorial, food service and other service industry labor, and begging. Child labor is a form of work that is likely to be hazardous to the health and or physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social development of children and can interfere with their education. The International Labor Organization estimates worldwide that there are 246 million exploited children aged between the ages of 5 and 17 involved in debt bondage. Forced recruitment for armed conflict, prostitution, pornography, the illegal drug trade, the illegal arms trade, and other illicit activities around the world. Guys, this is huge. This is so huge. $150 billion a year industry. See, once a drug dealer gets rid of their drugs, they're gone. But these children, folks, these children, they can sell over and over and over again. The ones they use for sex trafficking. I saw a video one time, and there was this cup, and it was full of marbles. All those marbles were all the Johnsons that child was forced to see that day. That's the kind of stuff that's going on here, folks, and it's horrible. It's just horrible. Identifying victims. And the victims are often kept isolated to prevent them from getting help. Their activities are restricted and are typically watched, escorted, or guided by associates of traffickers. Traffickers may coach them to answer questions with a cover story about being a student or tourist. Victims may be blackmailed by traffickers using the victim's status as an undocumented alien or their participation in an illegal industry. By threatening to report them to law enforcement or immigration officials, traffickers can keep victims compliant. And this is what it is. They start out in like a family. They feel like they're in a family. And let me tell you, these people that traffic them, sometimes they just look so normal you'd never expect it. Watch the movie Sound of Freedom and you'll see how normal the person who trafficked these people looked. Now, there's the children that are at risk for recruitment into CSEC are children who are under 18 years old, walk to school or to the store alone, own or have access to a computer, are attracted to consumer goods, because that's one of the ways they get them. They buy them things. You'll see them getting gift cards or things. Where did you get your new cell phone? Oh, my friend gave it to me. Yeah, who's your friend? You need to know, folks. A desire to develop romantic relationships. And many are brought into this and into sex trafficking by a beau. They think it's their boyfriend. They're in love. And he treats them real good at first, and then he beats them down, and it's just this vicious cycle, y'all. It's horrible. They sometimes feel insecure. They feel misunderstood, and this person's going to do everything they can to make them feel like they understand them and they're there for them. They fight with their parents, so they're looking for somebody to help fill the need that they don't feel that they're getting at home. Sometimes they feel their parents don't care. They want more independence. And kids nowadays, they want to do what they want to do. They don't want to listen to their parents. They want to test boundaries and take risks. And a lot of it is these kids don't think it can happen to them. But it can. some risk factors. Individual events in or characteristics of an individual's life. Environmental. Come from a child's neighborhood or community. And make sure you always know. Don't just, I've seen kids say, I want to go to such and such house. And their parents are like, I don't know who they are. Well, they're my friend's friend. Folks, don't do it. Make sure you know who your children are seeing. Social. The foundation set up in our culture that makes CSEC possible, or ways in which our society promotes or perpetrates sexual exploitation. Multiple studies estimate that 70 to 90% of sexually exploited children have a history of child sexual abuse. So if you know a child who has suffered, then you want to make sure you keep special watch over that child, because they're at a danger. Now these are some ways that recruitment can happen. There's a lot of parents selling their children. There's a movie called Blind Eyes Open. I believe you can watch it on Amazon Prime. You can order it. I have the video myself. It's an excellent movie. Shocking. This girl was talking about how her father had locked her into this apartment and he let people in and out to abuse her. It's heartbreaking. A lot of it's violence and force. They lure them in with all the promises and the gifts and everything. And then after they got them in, that's when the abuse starts. That's when they're so many of them are beat by their pimps. It's just horrible. Or somebody that was supposed to be the boyfriend that loved them. Then they don't know how to get out. It's kidnapping. Some people are kidnapped. It's not as prevalent as everyone thinks that human trafficking is kidnapping, and it's not. It is in some cases. It's not always. Seduction or coercion, and a lot of that coercion can be they got talked into sending a picture, and then that person, I'm going to tell your family, or I'm going to kill your family. They coerce them into doing what they want them to do. False advertising for modeling, acting, or dancing opportunities. I can tell you, I went to a class, and those little signs you see on the side of the road, make $500 fast. Some of those things, or they call you and want you to bring your child for modeling. Never, ever, ever leave your child in a room alone. If you can't go with them, then say, sorry, ain't happening. Because it's a trick. It is a trick. Peer recruitment. And this is the scary part, guys. People who are trafficking and recruiting people are not what you would think. There are kids recruiting kids. They're talked into it. They're living the life. They're in schools. They're recruiting our children at the lunchroom. Guys, it's scary. It is so scary. Internet entrapment through chat rooms or profile sharing sites. And that's what I was telling you before. They get online. They might get them to snap a picture or whatever. It's just mind-boggling. Now, when they get into human trafficking, a lot of people call it the game. Another good source, Rebecca Bender, is an amazing lady. She wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of the book, but you can find her online, Rebecca Bender, and she was trafficked. And it's her, and the book, her story, amazing story. And she talked about the game a lot in her book. The life, the game refers to pimping and prostitution. And then we're talking about the language here for all the different things. The track. The track is the area of town where prostitution occurs. They have their own little areas. The bottom. The person in the stable of victims who is appointed by the traffickers to manage, recruit, and supervise the other girls. Quota. The amount a victim must earn for her trafficker each night. And if she doesn't meet that quota, she is severely beaten, severely punished for that. Daddy. The term, a male trafficker often requires his victims to call him. Branded. When a trafficker tattoos a victim to show ownership, and it happens, folks. Family, folks. It's a term used to describe the environment created by the trafficker in an attempt to recreate the family structure so many of them so many youth lack. It's kind of like they've got their own family. Stable. That's a group of women that belong to the pimp. And wifey, wife-in-law, or other women in the stables. So they're all with that pimp, and they call each other that. Renegade is a person involved in prostitution who is operating without a pimp or trafficker. Guerrilla pimp, a pimp who uses violence and intimidation. Trick refers to the client or the act of having sex with the client. Choose up, when a female chooses a different pimp for herself. Usually that's not allowed in trafficking. Eyeballing, when a victim looks into a pimp's eyes, which could cause choosing up. Out of pocket, a term used to describe when a prostitute is operating without a pimp of her own accord and in disregard to pimping rules. Squaring up, attempting to exit or escape prostitution. Turn out, to be forced into prostitution. Trade up, trade down, when a pimp buys or sells a person. And these are some of the rules that they have. Walk in the street. No eyeballing. Don't speak directly to your pimp on the street. Don't hand money openly to your pimp. Don't get in the car with other pimps. Don't come home without your quota. No eating. Recruit other girls. That's all their rules, folks. Pimp control. They'll start to dress her, think for her, own her. If they're sexually active, they'll slow it down after sex. Taking her shopping for one item, hair and nails is fine. She'll develop a feeling of accomplishment. The shopping after a month will be replaced with cash. The lovemaking turns into raw sex. She'll start to crave the intimacy and be willing to get back into the pimp's good graces. After they have broken her spirit, she has no sense of self-value. Now the pimp put a price tag on the item that you've manufactured. CSEC impacts the local economy, decreases safety in our neighborhoods, links to other types of crime, guns, drugs, organized crime, and many times the pimp keeps these girls drugged up. It's how they control them. Glorifies the commercial sex industry and promotes negative images for children. Creates demand, a need for supply, and increased recruitment of children. Unfortunately, folks, U.S. is the #1 consumer in human trafficking. That's sad, really sad. Directly exposes children to C-sex locations, creates danger for children, cost resources of social services and healthcare systems, cost resources of law enforcement and court system, contributes to long-term impacts of prostituted adults, and costs the systems. And let me tell you, when these children, if they get out, many of them will die and just be, they're going to OD on drugs, or their pimp's going to beat them to death or whatever. It's sad. And I was going to say something else, but I can't remember. So when I remember it, I'll say it. Now, you're going to say, how do I know that somebody's a CSEC victim? If the age of an individual has been verified to be under 18, and the individual is in any way involved in the commercial sex industry or has a record of prior arrest for prostitution, then he or she is a CSEC victim. Now, one thing you will notice is many times, and we're trying to get over this now, the victims are just victimized over and over again. They're arrested. they're treated like scum of the earth from law enforcement, and law enforcement's really been working on trying to find out, because a lot of them it's prostitution. They think they're just prostitutes. But there's been many a cop nowadays that have been going out and reaching out to these young girls, trying to help them. It's just sad. For CSEC victims, physical and sexual violence are the everyday reality of many sexually exploited children, and may leave visible signs of abuse, such as unexplained bruises, black eyes, cuts, or marks. Exhibit behaviors including fear, anxiety, depression, submission, tension, and or nervousness. These kids are terrified. Exhibit hypervigilance or paranoid behavior. Sexually exploited children and youth often express interest in or in relationships with adults or older men. A lot of times you'll see these young girls, they won't look you in the eye. They're just beaten down so bad. Evidence of controlling or dominating relationships, including repeated phone calls from a boyfriend and or excessive concern about displeasing partner. That's another sign. Unexplained shopping trips or possession of expensive clothing, jewelry, or a cell phone could indicate the manipulation of an exploiter. And watch your children, because people do this to the children all the time. They're not in control of their own money, because once they're working for the pimp gets all their money. They don't get to see it. The pimp takes care of them. They have to give all their money to the pimp. They're not in control of their own money. I said that. They have this use of lingo or slang from the life among peers, or referring to a boyfriend as daddy. They have a secrecy about their whereabouts. They're unaccounted for time, vagueness concerning whereabouts, and or defensiveness in response to questions or concern. They're keeping late or unusual hours. They'll have a tattoo that he or she is reluctant to explain. They may be the result of the tattooing or branding by a pimp. Pimps and other sexual explorers often tattoo or brand children and youth, particularly girls. Youth are commonly branded with their exploiter's name tattooed on their neck, chest, or arms. And really, there's been a big uptick in trafficking of young males nowadays. So that's something to be on the lookout for. Wearing sexually provocative clothing can be an indicator of sexual exploitation, but it should be noted so as not to rely on stereotypes that not all children in the commercial sex industry wear such clothing. Sexually provocative clothing is not a warning sign in and of itself. Wearing new clothes of any style or getting hair and nails done with no financial means to this independently is a more general indicator of potential sexual exploitation. Most sexually exploited children have been trained to lie about their age. Sometimes a child's appearance and or actions can contradict the information they give. Be sensitive to clues in the behavior or appearance that could indicate that a child is underage. Personal information such as age, name, and or date of birth might change with each telling of his or her story, or the information given might contradict itself. They have no identification or is not in control of his or her identification documents. Has an explicitly sexual online profile via internet community sites such as MySpace, Black Planet. There's so many different ones. Excessive frequenting of internet chat rooms or classified sites such as Craigslist.org, known for recruitment. Depicts elements of sexual exploitation of the commercial sex industry and drawing, poetry, or other modes of creative expression, Prints lyrics to sexually explicit music or songs that allude to the sex industry. Doctors and nurses can consider frequent or multiple sexually transmitted diseases or pregnancies as a warning sign. Homeless or runaway youth who are in the position of surviving on their own may be forced to exchange sex for survival needs, such as housing or shelter. This can lead to recruitment into the commercial sex industry or a more organized or regular trading of sex money for money and shelter or things of value. Youth living in group homes and youth shelters are targeted by exploiters for sexual exploitation. And as someone who works in the child advocacy system, group homes are horrible. It's a terrible place. Truancy or tardiness from school may be a sign that sexual exploitation is occurring during school hours or during hours when the young person should otherwise be sleeping. Family dysfunction, including abuse in the home, emotional, sexual, or physical, neglect, absence of a caregiver, or substance abuse is a major risk factor for CSEC, and therefore may be a warning sign, because a lot of these people will traffic their children to get their drugs. It's sad but true. When children are coming out of CSEC, there's a lot of needs for them. They need crisis housing. They need long-term housing. They need food, clothing, education, job or income, viable alternatives for employment, transportation, legal representation or advocacy, opportunities to develop new skills and strengths, medical and or dental care, health education, mental health care. And I'm going to say anybody who's been exploited needs mental health care. Counseling and or case management, safety plans, and child and or parenting skills, because there are some that do have children, and then the children are raised in that thing. They need safety, they need protection, they need a non-judgmental environment. They didn't ask for this life. They need respect and acceptance, engagement in positive community, healthy adult relationships, mentors and or positive role models, supportive peers, understanding of the recovery process, affirmation of skills and strengths, recognition of abuse and trauma, an opportunity to not be defined solely by abuse and trauma. They need options. They need a sense of empowerment in one's own healing and restoration process. They need political education to understand the issue of CSEC. They need youth leadership opportunities, and they need love. The most important thing of all, they need love and holistic care. Use these do's and don'ts to be aware of your actions when working with children. Set a non-judgmental and empathetic tone. Treat the child as a victim of trauma and or abuse. And here are some symptoms. Some psychological symptoms to look for: panic attacks, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, social phobia, anorexia, I'll say it right in a minute, bulimia, bipolar, paranoid, avoidant, dependent, hopelessness, OCD, insomnia, hypersomnia, self-mutilation, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, hypersexualization, and bedwetting, flashbacks, and nightmares. That's just some of the psychological symptoms you're going to see. Physical symptoms that you're going to see: sexually transmitted diseases. They'll have burns, scars, and other signs of chronic abuse. Broken or missing teeth, tattoos, damage to sexual organs, Many of them can't have children because of the damage that's done to their bodies. Symptoms of psychological stress, upset digestive system, and multiple pregnancies and abortions. The impact of trauma. There's a constant state of fear and threat and hypervigilance. Quantifying trauma. Some of these kids go through, if they go through 5 rapes 5 days a week for 1 year, that's 13,000 rapes a year. And many of these people might even have more than that happen to them. They're subjected to beatings and torture by the buyers and the rapists. Beatings and sexual abuse by the trafficker and pimp. So they're just so beat up. You're going to see them have Stockholm Syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma. They're just so beaten down, y'all. So beaten down. Understanding complex trauma, chronic trauma experiences, biological and neurological processes, and physical and psychological state response. Behaviors of victims are symptoms. Complex trauma causes disturbances in 6 areas of functioning. The ability to regulate your impulses, the attention of consciousness, self-perception, relations with others, somatation, and systems of meaning. You're going to have a lot of these people, these people that are trafficked. They're going to have Stockholm Syndrome, and they're going to have trauma bonds. What needs to be present for Stockholm Syndrome to occur? The presence of a perceived threat to one's physical or psychological survival and belief that the abuser would carry out the threat. So they believe that if they step out of this life, that their trafficker could kill them, could hurt their family. That's the things that they're told. The presence of a perceived small kindness from the abuser to the victim. And they'll beat them down, and then they'll apologize to them and tell them how much they love them. Isolation from perspectives other than those of the abusers. And the perceived inability to escape the situation because they feel like there's no way out. There's nothing left for them. Nobody would want them the way they are now. That's the way they feel. Some more on Stockholm Syndrome and trauma bonds. The way that Stockholm Syndrome is displayed. Positive feelings by the victim toward the abuser or controller. That's the only person that can love me. They love me. They'll do anything for me. That's how they feel, folks. Negative feelings by the victim toward family, friends, or authorities trying to rescue or support them or win their release. They're so beaten down and controlled by that pimp, they think everybody's out to get them except for that pimp. Support of the abuser's reasons and behaviors. They support what the abuser's doing to them. It's my fault. I did it. It's all my fault. They beat me up because I did something wrong. Positive feelings by the abuser toward the victim. Supportive behaviors by the victim, at times helping the abuser. And some of these people, they love their abuser. They love them, and they'll do anything for them. Inability to engage in behaviors that may assist in their release or detachment. Who can suffer from Stockholm Syndrome? Abused children, battered and abused women, prisoners of war, cult members, incest victims, criminal hostage situations, concentration camp prisoners, controlling, intimidating relationships, and CSEC trafficking victims. CSEC victims often form trauma bonds with perpetrators. This can be the biggest obstacle in their recovery. How trauma bonds are formed. Violence and threats of violence. Alternating violence and kindness increases bonding. Believe if they even think a disloyal thought, the exploiter will know and retaliate. They live in that fear. Isolation increases bonding. shame and stigma associated with prostitution, rape, losing virginity increases bonding. What are the major indicators of trauma bonding? It shows ongoing symptoms of trauma or PTSD, intensely grateful for small kindness, denies violence when violence and threats of violence are actually occurring, rationalizes violence, denies anger of the exploiter to others and to self, believe they have some control over abuse, believe if they control the situation, it lessens pimps, customers, traffickers' control and abuse, self-blame for situation and abuse. Major indicators, indicators of trauma bonding. Hypervigilant to exploiter's needs. Seeks to keep that exploiter happy to decrease the violence. As long as they can keep that pimp happy, they're not going to get hurt. That's their thought. They're trying to protect themselves. Tries to get inside pimps, trafficking customers' heads. Sees world from exploiter's perspective. May or may not have own perspective. Experiences sense of self through pimps, traffickers, customers' eyes. Sees outside authorities, people trying to win release as the bad guys. You know, the ones who are trying to save them, they consider them the bad guys. Sees a pimp as a good guy or their protector. That's their protector. They love them and they're going to do anything to keep them safe. Is thankful and grateful. A pimp, trafficker, customer have not killed them. They're thankful because they're still alive. And they know that they could get killed at any moment if they do something wrong. Now, PTSD with our CSEC. The person has been exposed to a traumatic event in which both of the following were present. The person experienced, witnessed, or was confronted with an event or events that involved actual or threatened death or serious injury or threat to physical integrity of self or others. The person's response involved intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Some of the symptoms: intrusion. The traumatic events is re-experienced in reoccurrent distressing recollections, like images, perceptions, dreams. Reoccurrent distressing dreams. Acting or feeling as if the traumatic event were recurring. Sense of reliving the event, hallucinations, flashback episodes. Intense distress, reactivity to internal, external cues that symbolize or resemble aspect of traumatic events. A lot of people have little triggers that make them, that set them off. Avoidance. There's persistence avoidance to stimuli associated with trauma, numbing of general responses. Efforts to avoid thoughts and feelings, conversations associated with trauma. Efforts to avoid activities, places, people associated with the trauma. Inability to recall important aspects of the trauma. Diminished interest or perception in activities. Feeling of detachment from others. A restricted range of affect and loving feelings, and a sense of shortened future. Hyperarousal, persistent symptoms of increased arousal. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Irritability or outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance, and exaggerated startle response. Some defense mechanisms and coping strategies. Disassociation is intense levels of anxiety or fear cause dissociation. Primary dissociation in the face of overwhelming threat. Thoughts are split from experience. Secondary dissociation. Emotions or affect are not experienced during overwhelming stress. This is getting smaller and smaller. Teferi dissociation. Stressor is so overwhelming that a separate self develops in order to deal with the trauma. Initially an adaptive pattern that can become the only pattern response to fear and stress. includes feelings of depression or depersonalization and disconnection between memory and affect the person is in another world. Common psychological disorders: anxiety or stress disorder, attachment disorder, ADHD or conduct disorder, depression, dissociative and eating disorders, developmental and learning disorders, PTSD, impulse control disorders, mood and personality disorders, and self-harming and sleep disorders. As people that are trying to help, we need to seek to understand the person's frame and of reference, particularly reflective listening, expressing acceptance and affirmation. They need to know that we care about them. Eliciting and selectively reinforcing the client's own self-motivational statements, expressions of problem recognition, concern, desire, and attention to change, the ability to change. Monitoring the client's degree of readiness to change and ensuring the resistance is not generated by jumping ahead of the client. Affirming the client's freedom of choice and self-direction. Emotional safety. They need a safe space. They need appropriate music. Do not play music that promotes sexual exploitation. They need to decorate the space with appropriate informational and or inspiring images. They need something to lift them up. Use appropriate language. Be especially sensitive to derogatory terms in reference to sexually exploited youth. Create policies that address recruitment in the agency. Respect children's need for privacy and confidentiality. Set protocols for counseling and ensure privacy and confidentiality. Conduct mental health assessments. Encourage and practice self-soothing, self-care in staff and youth. Promote an inclusive and non-judgmental community. Provide ongoing professional developmental opportunities to ensure a trained and sensitive staff. So this goes into what happens after we bring the children out of the thing. Some of this stuff probably we don't even need to. Let's see. Let me see if there's anything else in this. We're about done. It's been almost an hour that we've been talking about this. Leave that. Okay, I want to go over some myths and stereotypes with you real quick. Children and youth choose to enter the sex trade, and that's not true. It's not something most of them choose. Children in the commercial sex industry are bad kids, and that's not true either. They're kids that get caught up in something they don't know how to get out of. Children in the commercial sex industry like to have lots of sex. That's not true either. Definitely not true. Some of them get in there and they've never had sex before. Children and youth lure and take advantage of unsuspecting men. Men have a choice. If they're having sex with children, that's their choice. Very, very seldom is it that they don't know the age when they're doing this. All children and youth in commercial and sex industry are drug addicts. Listen, these children don't go into this as drug addicts. This is how they pimps and people gain control of them by hooking them on the drugs. Sexual exploitation is work. Sexual exploitation is slavery, folks. Youth make a lot of money in the commercial sex industry. Lie. Their money is taken from them from their pimp. Being the life can be exciting and glamorous. No, it's probably very, very scary. Sexually exploited children and youth have the power and control within commercial sex industry. Definitely not. All pimps are male. Not true. There are female pimps as well. Only girls are involved in C-sex. There is not true, and there's a growing number of males that are involved in C-sex. Sexually exploited youth don't leave because they like commercial sex and industry. No, they are coerced. They are beaten down. They're made to think that they have no other choice. C-sex is a victimless crime. C-sex is not a big problem in the U.S. Ha! Not true. I want to tell you a little bit of street terminology. And I probably went over some of this. I think I did, the life or the gay. Yeah, never mind. I already went over all of that. You don't have to do that. And I don't have to do that. And I already did that. So guess what? We went over a whole little thing of this, and there's so much more to this. This is just my first one. This was actually a seminar that I took in 2016 on human trafficking. So a lot of it is probably stuff you didn't need. Well, not a lot of it. A lot of it's just educational. There are a few things on there that were more based on somebody who's working in the and with helping children. So that's it for tonight, because this video is just under an hour. I'm glad I got it done. I didn't know if I could get it done in an hour. Keep staying tuned. I do a lot of videos. Well, I've just started doing videos, and I want to do a ton of them. I do some with my faith, my Avon business. I love Temu. I do videos about that. I do videos about my Avon. You know, all kinds of videos, and then my child advocacy videos. Those are the kinds of things you're going to find on my channel. But right now, the most important thing is to help these children. Go see Sound of Freedom, folks. Go see it. It's an amazing story, and you'll learn a lot, and it'll make you want to take a stand. And that's why I'm going to keep making some more of these videos. I've got some other information I think I'm fixing to make another video on. It's more about human trafficking. But I thank you. If you have stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a blessed night. Thank you. Good night.